Hey, thanks for checking out The Solid Verbal. Now would be a great time to subscribe to the channel for college football content all off season long.
March Madness, huh? March Madness. I've got a bracket that I am holding up before the camera.
Oh, printed
out. Yep.
Holy hell.
We're going analog with this so that I can keep track, so that I can be the pace car and keep the discussion moving forward. We've got 32 coaches bracketed off into 4 groups of 8. Again, we're using that article by Bruce. We will use that as kind of our go-by here for our seating. What is your, I guess, personal measuring stick for who's going to go through and who isn't? Because we've got some of the titans of the sport. Nick Saban, the number 1 overall seed, just like Alabama, actually in the NCAA tournament, which again kicks off on Thursday and Friday. Tips off, I guess I should say, on Thursday and Friday. But Nick Saban, number 1 overall seed here, no great surprise. His first round matchup, not to get too far out over my skis, is against Mac Brown, who's the 8th seed in this bracket. How will you be scoring? How will you personally be judging which coach you want to put through versus who gets kicked to the side?
Well, look, I'm going to look at track record, right? It's great that a coach was excellent last year or the last couple of years, but I want sustained success on some level, or comparing coaches and who has sustained more success. And what is success? Well, that's an incredibly subjective term, as you know. I want to see winning games. I want to see beating good teams. I want to see finishing in top 5s, 10s, 15s, 25s, whatever. I want a track record of hiring well, recruiting well. This one's, I think, more specific to me. I want finding multiple quarterbacks plural. I think that's incredibly important to find, not just have a flash in the pan situation where you ride one guy through a stretch of your career, but otherwise you weren't able to find and develop that guy to do multiple eras. I want you not losing to terrible teams, preferably ever, right?
Yeah.
Not being outclassed by clearly inferior teams on the field. That would be a big deal. And then I want at least one side of the ball to be largely excellent during your tenure. And a side of the ball, either side of the ball, whether it's your background or not as a head coach when you were a position coach or coordinator, I want non-disastrous sides of the ball. And I know we're still on our Iowa moratorium, I believe.
Yeah,
I'm getting too in depth about the 2022 Iowa football season, but I'm looking for no, or maybe just blip on the radar, disastrous sides of the ball.
Yeah,
for a coach. That's what I'm holding against coaches, or for coaches, putting in favor of coaches that, look, they've never had a truly bad offense or defense. And that's, to me, that's important because they are giving their team, they're giving their coaching staff every opportunity in the world to succeed. So that's mainly what I'm looking at in terms of how I'm going to grade coaches against each other.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple other important context clues that I think I've got here in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
It is not everything. It is certainly not the most important stat, but if we're doing any kind of bracket like this, you need to have all-time winning percentage. You need to have some greater foundation. For example, we've got Nick Saban, Mac Brown. Right now, Nick Saban has 279 career victories at the college football Division I FBS level.
Yeah.
Mac Brown's second, 268, excuse me. So a historic matchup, to say the least, right out of the chute. But where do these guys stand? Some of the names that we're going to discuss are actually higher up on this list than you might expect, if only because they've been in one spot for a good long time. Obviously, if we're talking about some of the newer names on this list, that might not apply. Another bit of, I think, intrigue, if you will.
Okay.
Our good friends over at College Football Reddit, reddit.com/r/CFB, somebody over there put together a 5-year average of the 24/7 composite recruiting rankings. Again, not everything. Nick Saban's been there a good long time. Nick Saban, as you might expect, has the highest average of all of the schools that are listed here. They only did it out to the top 50. But again, important context here. To your point of, who is doing more with less, who is able to attract big time talent to the school. These are things that I think we're going to at least consider as we're going through. My emotional rubric is also guys that I would want as kind of my counterpart if I were in a bar and things got scrappy.
Okay.
the so-called crazy guy in the fight. Those guys tend to motivate. Don't always win, but tend to motivate and at
There's
least make
belief there.
there's belief there, right? They've got
Yeah.
the Ted Lasso believe sign hanging up in the locker room, like Penn State basketball. And of course, just some guys like Brian Kelly in this list that I don't like. So I'm going to need to figure out in my own time, in my own head, how to deal with that.
It's a bracket, and what do we do with our brackets in the NCAA tournament? We just go with our gut, and we're like, I don't like VCU. Sorry, I don't like them, and so that's a reason enough to fill out a bracket in a manner that we get used to. So I'm totally good with you, shooting from the hip with this one. Ty, do you want to begin?
Let's do it. Got 4 brackets. I changed the geography a little bit just to be more thematic.
Yeah.
And more appropriate for some of the coaches that we're listing off here today. We've got a South bracket, a Midwest bracket, an East, and a Southeast.
Okay.
All right. A little bit weighted towards the lower right quadrant of the good old US of A. First overall seed, Nick Saban, squaring off against Mac Brown. Saban is the 1 overall in the South bracket. As I just alluded, Nick Saban right now has the most wins of any of these coaches, Division I FBS career. Mac Brown is second on that list. So this is a historic matchup of sorts, Dan. I would be hard-pressed to not pick Nick Saban here.
Sure.
If only because of what Nick Saban's done. Nick Saban is also continuing to recruit, continuing to perform at a very, very high level. I think he obviously checks all of the boxes for your little personal rubric. He seems to be getting better with age. He always hires at a really high level. It does not seem like maybe on the Mac Brown side, which is what we've seen, maybe like a little bit of steam coming out of the balloon. That does not appear to be the case at all for Nick Saban. They have reached critical mass with that Alabama program. And so I'm not going to say it's on autopilot. He clearly is still the engine behind it, but it's just continuing to produce at such a high level that it's got to be Nick Saban going through here, right?
First of all, do we put steam in balloons? Is that a thing?
Hot air balloons.
That's hot air, but is that steam? I'm gonna have to do some.
It's hot air.
I'm gonna have.
I don't know how hot it is, but
okay. I don't understand the principles of flight. Let's get that out of the way first and foremost. I think. First of all, it's interesting that we have Nick Saban against Mac Brown here. I'm going to try to speed through this because we've got a long list of matchups, but I think the 32 seed being Mac Brown is full on disrespectful from you. Won 9
it wasn't
straight.
Listen, it wasn't from me. It's from Bruce.
It's our show.
It's from Bruce. I went through 1 through 25, and then the others that he considered, I tacked them on at the end. He didn't even list Cristobal. Maybe he shouldn't be on the list. I don't know. But that was the way that I put these together.
I'm saying it's disrespectful of us. It's disrespectful of Bruce. Mac Brown wins a ton at Texas, of course. And then he doesn't, right, at Texas. And now he's at North Carolina. It's been sort of a mixed bag. Sam Howell and Phil Longo have been highlights. The running backs, the running back duel from a couple of years ago was a highlight. Really strong receivers. Defense has been a nightmare. I think I'm with you in suggesting that we are looking at this maybe in the last 5 years. Like that's a good like what you did in 2007 is not at all relevant when the recruits from the class of 2024 were born in 2007. Like it doesn't matter what you did in the early 2000s or even in the most of the 20 teens or whatever. So it's disrespectful. Mac Brown has had an incredible career, but as of right now, and I like that we have North Carolina on the onset because they're the team that I'm considering to be the replacement level good team.
Yeah.
In that they've had a bunch of top 20-ish classes. And if we compare two coaches in a matchup to say who would do better at North Carolina, no clear advantages geographically or historically, no clear disadvantages because there's a lot of talent, on the East Coast, Southeast, they have access to, and they've recruited pretty well. The path is not super easy, but it's not crazy difficult. So I'm using North Carolina actually as my goodest team program in the country, where they're like maybe right around 17 or 18. So who would do better at North Carolina, Nick Saban or Mac Brown? I'm going to say Nick Saban. How about that?
Nick Saban. Let's move on. Okay. The number 2 seed in the South bracket, Brian Kelly, squaring off against the number 7 in the South bracket, Troy Calhoun of Air Force. Yeah. Brian Kelly, of course, of LSU. Oh, I almost said Notre Dame. So look, Troy Calhoun has been at Air Force since 2007. He's won 121 games. He's won his last 4 bowl games. He's won double-digit games 3 of the last 4 years. To your point of doing more with less, it's hard to beat Troy Calhoun.
Yeah.
Air Force is never going to be a recruiting juggernaut. They're always going to have to run a system that suits their personnel. Whether I like it or not, he's been very successful at running that system and at being consistent, right? That being said, Brian Kelly maybe isn't doing quite as much with less, but has also been shockingly consistent. That's why he's got the monster deal from LSU, why he decided to leave Notre Dame in pursuit of a national championship. So sure, Brian Kelly has taken his programs to greater heights, but Troy Calhoun, you could argue, has been just as consistent, not working with the same level of talent. And I think that makes that a very interesting matchup here between Kelly and Calhoun.
I think you have to respect and admire the job Troy Calhoun has done at Air Force with the Falcons, but one top 25 finish during his tenure at Air Force. Brian Kelly is one of those everywhere he's been, he wins kind of coaches, which include small, medium, and large places now in his career. So I don't believe that Troy Calhoun would do a better job at North Carolina, even with, what, is a limitation at Air Force and the kinds of system and athletes you can recruit to a service academy. I believe in my marrow, that Brian Kelly would do a better job at North Carolina. He's found quarterbacks, not top tier quarterbacks, but decently good quarterbacks at various stops. Has had good sides, has had very good offensive line, good defense. Like there's just a calling card to Brian Kelly and different ways to win that a recruiter, I would be much more confident in Brian Kelly going 11-1 in Chapel Hill than I would Troy Calhoun. But again, what we're talking about, 3 of the last 3 full seasons, I believe. So if you eliminate the 2020 COVID year, double-digit wins with the bowl win. So nothing to smirk or scoff at. Troy Calhoun, very much deserving to be in this bracket.
Who does better at Air Force?
Who does better at Air Force? I don't think that matters, honestly.
Well, because
it matters.
Look, I mean, Brian Kelly's got the experience in his career of being at a place like Grand Valley State.
He's just shown it more.
Yeah.
Brian Kelly has gone bigger and bigger. Troy Calhoun, whatever he's done, he does not have varied stops. He has varied hair shades.
He does, which I'm glad you brought up, which he had I don't know if it's still going on with the Just for Men look that Troy Calhoun sported a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of varied diets, this is a varied color palette that he's been working with, but nonetheless, That does not pertain to the on-field success. I just think it's got to be, look,
Brian Kelly.
I'm not the world's biggest Brian Kelly fan. Brian Kelly's been successful at every level, and we just don't have that body of work with Troy Calhoun on to the same degree.
And the thing I would also credit Brian Kelly with is had an incredibly down 4-8 season, much publicized 4-8 season.
I am aware. I'm familiar.
Oregon went 4-8 that same year. Bounced back incredibly, right?
Yep.
Made necessary changes, improved where improvements were needed. And so Brian Kelly, to me, is the no-brainer through to the next round.
3 seed in the South bracket, Kyle Whittingham squaring off against the 6 Brett Bielema, Dan.
This one's interesting.
It is an interesting
matchup.
It's a very interesting matchup. So you look at Brett Bielema, and of course had a ton of success at Wisconsin. The Arkansas experience, the 5 years he was there, a bit of a mixed bag, right? 4-8 his final season in 2017, not exactly going out on a high note, but what he's done in very short order now, coming back home to Illinois, to the Big Ten, has been very successful in just 2 years. I think there's a lot of optimism around that program. So you feel good. You got good vibes for sure if you're an Illini fan. And on the Kyle Whittingham side, I mean, we've been huge Kyle Whittingham fans for a good long time. Kyle Whittingham is kind of the model for consistency. We talk about Troy Calhoun being in one place since 2007. Kyle Whittingham's been at Utah since 2004. He's been there forever and has certainly as of late, just in the last 10 years or so, been very, very, very consistent with that program. He had success early on in his tenure, but over the last 8 seasons, Dan, they're just money. They are just money. They seem to have solved the riddle of putting a consistent product out there year in and year out. 2 consecutive Rose Bowl appearances, unfortunately lost both, but nonetheless, Utah feels like a program that it's just sort of ever so slightly trending up. So this is a good matchup in the first round here.
There are people who consider Kyle Whittingham to be one of the best 5 coaches in America.
Yeah.
Best 6 or 7 coaches in America because of how consistently good Utah has been lately. You mentioned the last couple Rose Bowls. You can say what you will about the Pac-12. You can't finish better than first, which they've done these past couple of seasons. So I think he's a terrific coach. Now, hasn't done it anywhere else. Started his career sustaining the excellence that Urban Meyer put in place, but this has been his program for well over a decade now. This is not him just taking advantage of what Urban Meyer built. This has been his program. They are one of the lone consistent success stories of a program jumping up as from a G5 level conference to a Power 5 level conference, right? We saw Colorado really struggle with that. One of the success stories of realignment in general, a team trading conferences. So Brett Bielema has proved it at different places. The highs have been higher for Brett Bielema in the Rose Bowls won, and then those types of NFL players on both sides of the ball generated in terms of star power. Russell Wilson, J.J. Watt, guys like that at Wisconsin, but did struggle at Arkansas, or up and down anyway. Both have found, I would say, multiple quarterbacks. You know, there was some pretty terrific passing offenses, weirdly enough, at Arkansas. Obviously, a couple of efficient quarterbacks at Wisconsin, to say the least. So I do give Brett Bielema points now, because the exercise that we all put in place is, but what would he do at Wyoming? What would he do at Illinois? What would he do at Wake Forest? And Kyle Whittingham's never left.
No.
Whereas Brett Bielema, both by his own accord and by other people's accords, has had to prove it at multiple places. And to win at Illinois has been sort of proven to be not super easy. And with the defense, with the hiring, with the vision on offense, Brett Bielema's been very impressive overall. I'm still going to say Kyle Whittingham, because you have to knock a failure against Brett Bielema, but I think it's incredibly close.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very easy to look at what Bielema's done most recently in a stop now with Illinois and say he's building them back up, and that's admirable. All too often when we're looking at coaches, we have that same question in the back of our mind. Are they able to build up whatever program they're working on, build up to achieve something new? We don't talk as much, perhaps, as we should about coaches who take over for a quote unquote legend, because that's what Urban Meyer was at Utah, and they're able to maintain the success. That's really hard to do.
If not build upon, yeah.
Yeah, if not build upon. You can speak to the Mark Helfrich era, Dan.
Sure.
I can speak to like the Dan Devine era at Notre Dame. Every school has a story similar to this, right? We can talk about Larry Coker's Miami. We can talk about all these instances we've seen throughout the history of college football where the guy after the guy steps in and just isn't able to keep the proverbial steam in the balloon.
Right.
So
steam in the balloon.
That's right. It's our new thing here. So I appreciate greatly what Brett Bielema's done, and I'm excited to watch Illinois. But Kyle Whittingham has just been a staple in college football, a staple. Yeah. And though I credit Bielema for jumping around a little bit, Whittingham moves on. Let's go to the final first round matchup in the South bracket. This is an interesting one. This is based on Bruce's seeding, not ours. Okay. He's got Kalen DeBoer ahead of Jimbo Fisher in his rankings.
I love this matchup. Yeah.
Kalen DeBoer is the 4. No pun intended, no rhyme intended. Jimbo Fisher is the 5 in this bracket. The winner moves on to play Nick Saban, which is its own conversation. But Kalen DeBoer against Jimbo Fisher, Dan. Very interesting matchup. Kalen DeBoer, I think, has fashioned himself as a bit of an X's and O's savant. Everywhere he's been, he has proven that he can coach offense at a really high level. He's very creative. You saw what he did in his time at Indiana. Saw what he did at his time at Fresno, what he's done in just 1 year at Washington. It's apparent that there is some real coaching talent there and that he can organize the troops very quickly. Jimbo Fisher, at least on the offensive side, is a ship going in an opposite direction, right? He's essentially had to fire himself and bring in a guy like Bobby Petrino to run the offense because what he was trying wasn't working. What he was trying was very stale and stubborn, and it ticked off A&M fans to no end. That said, the recruiting at A&M has been at a much, much higher level in the time that Jimbo's been there. We could debate the merits of why that is or is not, but
I don't think there's a debate.
I mean, it's just
results oriented. Yeah.
It's a fascinating matchup here between Jimbo and Kalen DeBoer.
So if you're North Carolina today and you have $5 million and you have two checks, one that says pay to the order of John James Fisher or James John Fisher, I forget which order, or Kalen DeBoer, I would imagine the trustees, the chancellor, whoever at North Carolina would probably be more enthusiastic about giving that money to Kalen DeBoer today.
Yeah.
In terms of a track record, in terms of finding multiple quarterbacks as a head coach, not just, having a good season with Jake Haener, but finding him and developing him, identifying him and developing him. We still have a Heisman National Championship quarterback in Jimbo Fisher's favor. We have both of these guys lately on the precipice of the playoff-ish, I guess, for Washington and most certainly for Texas A&M with Jimbo Fisher. So Jimbo Fisher has accomplished things and has been to heights fully unknown to Caleb DeBoer as a head coach. So I'm saying if I'm North Carolina today, I'm giving that money to Kalen DeBoer.
Yeah.
Because I'm too worried about Jimbo Fisher's catastrophic predilection for offense lately. And that's not his predilection, but catastrophic offenses lately. And oh man, this is incredibly difficult. The more accomplished coach is Jimbo Fisher. The better coach today is Kalen DeBoer. The coach who is able to accumulate talent, and you have talent, then you can do more things than when you don't have talent, is Jimbo Fisher. I'm going to ever so slightly, because I believe winning a national championship is something that you'll never have to apologize for or look past. I'm giving it to Jimbo Fisher. Even though Kalen DeBoer is the today North Carolina check, I'm giving it to Jimbo Fisher just because, again, it was not that long ago that he got a team with a very average quarterback to the brink of the playoff.
Right.
So,
yeah, I mean,
A&M,
look,
and Fisher.
There's a thing that they say about NFL quarterbacks, that veteran quarterbacks, or you saw it with Joe Montana, you certainly saw it with Peyton Manning, but they say that these guys, these notable legends of the sport, when they're really at the end of their career, the arm is the first thing to go. And when it goes, it just happens. It's not like it happens gradually over the course of a couple seasons. It just sort of goes. And suddenly there's no zip on the fastball. And I worry a little bit about that with Jimbo Fisher. I worry a little bit about that because what he has been running offensively, by and large, has been the same thing since his time at Florida State.
Yeah.
He hasn't changed a whole lot there. He hasn't really had to change a whole lot there. He's been very stubborn about doing so.
And even when it looks like it's changing, it
not
still
really.
Seems like the vision and philosophy is rooted in the same place. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wonder if we're approaching a situation with Jimbo Fisher as a coach where he's lost that zip, where he's lost that fastball. And we'll find out. I mean, I don't know if he's equipped to handle a setup like this, where he is turning things over to a guy like Bobby Petrino. I think Bobby Petrino is just glad to be there. I think Bobby Petrino will come with ideas, but I don't think Bobby Petrino is going to want to be pushed around, because Bobby Petrino in his own right was a pretty successful coach, at least for a moment in time.
Right.
I don't know how Jimbo Fisher is going to deal with that scenario. Now, I have high hopes for A&M because the talent that they have on hand is still pretty damn good. And I expect great things from A&M this season. I think they will be just fine. But
Who's better? Who's better?
I
Who's
think
the better coach?
I like you would give the money to Kalen DeBoer if it were my program. I would give the money to Kalen DeBoer. He's younger. He's got, I think, a very bright coaching future in front of him. But what you did before still has to count for something.
By the way, I think if I said Caleb DeBoer before, I apologize.
It's okay.
I've just now got paranoid that I did Kalen DeBoer, of course. Can I mention something else? How many seasons has Kalen DeBoer built a roster with a roster that he has built, coached a Power 5 team?
Yeah.
0.
Right. That's exactly right. So I think I give it to Jimbo as well.
Okay.
I don't feel great about that matchup, but Jimbo and a buzzer beater.
Okay.
The slipper still fits.
Got our first upset here, a 5 over a 4. Not a big
Great.
one, but you want to work through this bracket and then move. We might have to make this a 2-parter and finish this.
That's fine. Whatever you want.
Nick Saban against Jimbo Fisher.
Ooh, spicy.
Very spicy.
Nick Saban.
We had Nick Saban against Jimbo Fisher before the 2022 season, the War of Words.
Yes, we did.
This is Saban, right? Obviously, it's Saban.
I mean, you can line up basically any coach ever and say it's Nick Saban. Now, we can have a conversation at another point of if it's today, are you giving that $10 million check to Kirby Smart or Nick Saban? That's a worthwhile conversation.
Well, we might have that conversation because Kirby Smart's the number 2 overall seed, but
right.
That might not be until our next episode at this rate.
Yeah. And look, if we're having this conversation in 2014, it's an interesting conversation. Jimbo Fisher, Nick Saban. Yeah. But at this moment, not much of a conversation. It's Nick Saban moving through with a 27-point win, early run in the first half.
What about Kyle Whittingham against Brian Kelly?
Now this is fascinating.
This is a really good matchup. This is a really freaking good matchup.
So let's go back to North Carolina. Let's go back to, if you are running the Tar Heel program, if you are that chancellor, if you are that trustee, whatever, that board of trustees, who does better in Chapel Hill?
By the way, just for reference, Bruce has Brian Kelly 8th overall, Kyle Whittingham 9th overall.
Okay. So this was close for him too.
This was close for him too. If I am giving money to somebody at North Carolina, I am probably giving that money to Brian Kelly. I'm probably giving that money to Brian Kelly because everywhere Brian Kelly's been, and he's been in a couple stops, he's won. Mm-hmm. He's built from the lines out. He hasn't always had high-level quarterback play. That's my one gripe.
Yep.
But by and large, everywhere he's been, he's found a way to win double-digit games and be really successful. We have not seen Kyle Whittingham do that. I have no doubt that he could do that. We just have not seen it. So through that lens, I probably put Brian Kelly through.
I'm putting Brian Kelly through, proving it at multiple places, winning the SEC West in year 1, taking Notre Dame to the national championship game, an undefeated season, which, again, you can say whatever you want about Notre Dame's 2012 schedule and the way they navigated it. Going undefeated is incredibly difficult. Going to the playoff, perhaps easier when you play 12 games rather than 13 at Notre Dame, but nonetheless, went to the playoff.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I have qualms with both of these coaches in terms of developing offenses and finding quarterbacks who have some pop downfield, right? That's been the issue. Now, I still think Kyle Whittingham has found multiple quarterbacks, though I don't know how many of them at the moment are playing in the NFL or have had much experience in the NFL. Same can be said about Notre Dame and I guess LSU, since they're not going to have an NFL quarterback out of this past year's team. But I think I'm still going to go with that North Carolina element. I would take Brian Kelly in Chapel Hill because I think he has a better understanding of navigating a big place in a big conference, or big conference-ish with Notre Dame.
Sure.
So I'm going BK in this spot, albeit barely, because some of the Utah lows didn't thrill me. Some of the hirings haven't thrilled me. But damn if he's done a great job there, but still going BK.
Yeah, BK is just steady Eddie.
Yep.
You know what you're paying for with Brian Kelly. You might not like the guy. He might have a fake accent, which I did deduct a few points for, if I'm being honest. But you know what you're going to get. So we're putting BK through. That means our final to come out of the South bracket is Saban against Kelly.
Which we've seen, and we've seen different coaches win that matchup.
We could probably pencil Saban all the way through to the final, but Saban's ability to attract talent at a really high level, his ability to hire new guys seemingly every year or every other year to run the offense or the defense, I think is perhaps the single most impressive thing of any of these coaches on this list. His ability to deal with coaching turnover, even roster turnover, frankly, with guys going pro, with new top flight recruits coming in every single cycle, his ability to manage all that is a masterclass,
Yeah, of course.
And we talk about Brian Kelly, that he's more of a CEO type. And that's kind of his style of a coach. And even guys who played for him have said, well, it's you never really know what Brian Kelly stands for. You never get too close to him. That's by design. He's obviously been very successful at it, but there's got to be that element to Saban too, because you can't not be a CEO type, at least on some level, if you've got all of these moving pieces every single season. It just seems like a lot, and I'm sure he's got the support staff to deal with that at Bama, but there are a lot of other guys who are dealing with similar things, and they're nowhere near as successful.
Brian Kelly on a current win streak, head-to-head against Nick Saban, if I recall correctly.
That is correct, yep.
On a current win streak. Now, there's no real case for Brian Kelly. They've played on the biggest stage, right? The BCS National Championship.
I fell asleep after the first quarter, but you can fill me in on 42-14.
Yeah, the only thing is this isn't even speaking realistically, but the only conversation that you could have, hypothetically, would be if they're both at their current place for the next 4 years, who finishes with more wins? If you are a believer that this is Nick Saban winding down, and if you're the type of college football thinker, like you mentioned, that when it goes, right? When you lose the zip on the fastball, there's no getting it back. If you are believing that about Nick Saban, which I am not, at least
I'm not either
right now, then that you can plant a flag and say Brian Kelly next 4 years, rejuvenated. LSU should win a bunch of games, has quarterbacks, should have, has a really strong defensive coordinator at the moment, has had more continuity with his coordinators. Sure. I'm still saying until proven otherwise, even in the short term, even if we're starting from 2022, I have a lot more faith in Nick Saban.
Yeah. Saban goes through. Saban in the Final Four.
Yep.
Saban in the final. Let's move to the Midwest. Number 1 overall seed in the Midwest, not overall seed. Number 1 seed in the Midwest, Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh squaring off against Willie Fritz.
Interesting. Yeah.
Very interesting matchup. A lot of people like Willie Fritz a lot. Think he's a really good coach. I happen to be one of them. Jim Harbaugh is ever the interesting character in college football. I feel like more often than not, we've had a similar discussion on this show. Maybe not in the context of a 32 coach bracket, but we're always trying to figure out where does Jim Harbaugh rank among these. I think we feel pretty confident that he's in the top 10, but depending on what he says or how he recruits or how his teams perform, we're more willing, maybe with Harbaugh than anybody else, to slide him up or down that list at a moment's notice. He's just a controversial figure, and he's not that controversial of a guy. He's just a controversial figure for a multitude of reasons. So, Harbaugh against Fritz, Dan.
The case for Fritz is he's not a wild card, right? In his own way, I suppose he is. He's been at a number of places, won at a number of places. Jim Harbaugh has won exactly 0 mineral water bowls, right. Whereas Willie Fritz, look it up. Look it up, people. It's Jim Harbaugh going back to San Diego, going to Stanford, which was as down a program nationally when he took it over. I think it was Walt Harris who predates Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah, that was a bad era of Stanford football.
And immediately, right, they beat USC as 40-point underdogs. He takes them to, the New Year's 6 BCS level, bowl level, finds quarterbacks. Has found quarterbacks a little bit less frequently at Michigan, arguably, has relied on transfers, and that hasn't always worked out in the long term. But nonetheless, Jim Harbaugh's taken teams to playoffs. He's gotten over the individual and team hump of beating Ohio State and winning the Big Ten, going to the playoff in consecutive seasons. To me, it's a no-brainer. Willie Fritz, though. Look, beating USC in a bowl game, a magical season for Tulane, has a background on offense, but it's been, developing defensive players lately. That's been really impressive. I give it to Willie Fritz in terms of credit, respect, and being among the nation's best coaches. But right now, it's Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah, I think it's Jim Harbaugh. They've both had a couple stops. You're right about the Mineral Water Bowl.
Oh, thank God.
Back to his time at Central Mizzou back in 2001, right around the turn of the century. But Jim Harbaugh, I think, I referenced it at the top with this awesome chart that we got from our friends over at CFB Reddit. And they go through, and again, they're giving you the 5-year recruiting average. Michigan's fairly low on that list. Despite their recent success, despite winning the Big Ten 2 years in a row, despite going to the playoff 2 years in a row, they're 13th on this list over the last 5 years. That's behind Florida, behind Penn State, Notre Dame, Oregon, Oklahoma, LSU, Texas, Clemson, A&M, Ohio State, Georgia. Obviously, Georgia and Alabama are kind of the exceptions, as is Ohio State at this point. But a lot of teams in front of them there that have not had near the success that Jim Harbaugh has had. And so I think that is definitely a testament to he is finding a way to, I don't want to say do more with less, but he's finding a way to maximize the talent that he has on hand. It's still very good talent. They're still bringing in great recruiting classes, but he is getting a lot out of those recruits. And I think that's meaningful. Also, if we're going to harken back to the Ty Hildenbrand emotional scale, Jim Harbaugh alongside you in a bar fight is an interesting thing to ponder.
Cleats.
Don't know what you're going to get. Could be a very introspective commentary on society. He could be totally nuts. I don't know which version of Harbaugh you get in that type of scenario.
Oh, I can tell you exactly which. There's no question to me.
You think he just loses it?
If Jim Harbaugh could, he'd still be an active University of Michigan football player.
I agree with that.
All he wants to do is play football, think football, live football, and be on a football team in a football locker room. He's a football guy, Ty, as they
Capital
say.
G, yeah.
Now, the interesting thing about Jim Harbaugh is what a difference 2 years makes, I guess, because a couple of years ago, the narrative, the conversation around Jim Harbaugh is he ultimately a disappointment considering his record against Ohio State and Michigan State? You look at this rubric and I'm saying, how competitive are you against the best teams on your schedule? And the best teams on Michigan's schedule outside of Penn State, and best is relative, but the teams that Michigan fans and the Michigan community most want to win are those Michigan State and Ohio State games. And he was a disappointment. And you go 2 years later and, he still lost one of those to Michigan State, but it's a new world. And so it's Jim Harbaugh, but fascinating that overall, and look, he got to a Super Bowl too, that we're now talking about a new era of Jim Harbaugh Michigan football these last couple of years, because this would be a more difficult conversation 3-4 years ago.
Let's move on to, so we're going to put Harbaugh through, right? And I think we're both kind of in agreement on that front. Yeah. I mean, love him or hate him, he's a fantastic football coach. This is a very interesting matchup. And not so much because I think there's any doubt about who we're putting through, but I think the conversation could go to a weird place.
Okay.
The number 2 seed in the Midwest here is James Franklin.
Okay.
James Franklin, per Bruce Feldman, is the 5th best coach in college football.
Yeah.
Which, as he mentioned in his article, receives more pushback perhaps than anything.
And he's been steadfast with that line of thinking, Bruce.
Steadfast.
Yeah.
Yeah. For as long as we've known him, he's been in on Franklin. Mm-hmm. First round matchup here is against the 7th seed in the Midwest, Mario Cristobal.
Okay.
I put Cristobal in. He was not listed at all on Bruce's bracket. So he was not one of the top 25. He was not one of the top 30 or 31 based on the names that he listed. But I threw Mario in. I didn't know where he would be matched up here or against whom he would be matched up. And the auto bracket thing did it for me. Put it against James Franklin. So I don't think there's really any debate here that it's James Franklin. I think it's got to be James Franklin. I think so much of Mario Cristobal in his tenure as a coach at Oregon, at Miami, his tenure as an assistant coach everywhere he's been, Mario Cristobal has definitely carved out this little reputation for himself where he's seen as a big-time recruiter. And for sure, that holds up. He is able to attract talent. I think the promise of Mario Cristobal as a top flight college football head coach, that verdict is still out there, man. Like, I don't know if we can say for sure that he's ever going to be a great coach. I don't know. That's not to say that James Franklin has been a great coach, but James Franklin, I think, has accomplished way more and is still kind of in his prime of accomplishing things at Penn State. Perhaps a big year incoming for the Nittany Lions in 2023. I don't know where Miami's headed. They just fired Josh Gaddis after 1 year. Clearly, year one did not go well for Cristobal, even in going back home to a place where he's supposed to be more familiar. So I just feel like a lot of what we've heard with Cristobal is the promise of greatness, and we've yet to really see it.
All right. Who am I describing here? One in a very difficult place to win, known as a terrific recruiter, won a bunch of games, but ultimately fans were left pretty disappointed with offense and in-game decision-making. Hire Joe Moorhead. There's a lot of weird connective tissue, known for making shrewd assistant hires most of the time, not all of the time.
Yeah.
Is James Franklin a rich man's Mario Cristobal? It's an interesting hypothetical. I don't know. I don't know, because Penn State fans on a certain level have to respect the sustained, somewhat successful program that James Franklin has built. But in the way that Oregon fans say, look, we loved winning a bunch of games, but it wasn't always fun. I feel like Penn State might have that with some of the recent offenses. Look, Miami's offense this year, catastrophic. Penn State's offense last year, so the 2021 season, borderline catastrophic.
It was after Sean Clifford got hurt. It was catastrophic.
Yeah, and even with Sean Clifford, I think the full season, it was like 95th in points per drive. Now that includes, an injured quarterback, so you got to take that context into it. But they have been prone to some lows on offense, and James Franklin has never had a quarterback even close to what Justin Herbert was and could have been at that place. But still, I think there's a lot of overlap here. I'm giving it to James Franklin. He's been there longer. He's been successful longer. I don't think there are the same questions. He's never had as low a season as Miami had this year. But it's not Mario Cristobal's roster. It's not. So I'm willing to forgive a little bit of that because, look, Mario Cristobal went to the Rose Bowl and won, had some pretty high highs at Oregon. Just in terms of results, just in terms of winning percentage. But right now, I'm giving it to James Franklin because in this moment, sustaining something means something to me, and Penn State is right there in the present and has been so for longer.
James Franklin also revived or started for the first time the Vanderbilt Commodores.
Sure.
Which is not easy.
No. Same for Cristobal at FIU, but
by any stretch. Cristobal is the only one of these two that was fired. That move to fire him by FIU was something that's been criticized over the course of time. But both are, I think, there's a lot of connective tissue, as you said. I think you hit it best. Franklin's got to be the one who goes through, though.
At Chapel Hill?
At Chapel Hill, I think I put Franklin.
Okay. I think so, too. In this moment, yep.
Okay, two more interesting matchups here in the first round. Let's go to the 3-6. Dave Clawson against Mike Norvell. So now that we've gotten down off of that top line and the big dogs, we're starting to talk about some, I would say, unsung heroes, at least in the form of Dave Clawson, who has done a lot in his time at Wake Forest. We deduct points for the slow mesh, yes?
No. I say do whatever it takes to win games. I'm not deducting points.
I think we deduct one, just a half point for the slow mesh. But Dave Clawson against Mike Norvell, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting matchup here.
So Memphis won before Mike Norvell.
Yep.
Somewhat won after, not as much. I think history has proven that winning at Wake Forest and Bowling Green is not for the faint of heart or faint of ability or like there is, what's the name of the bar rescue dude again, Ty, that you love so much? Oh, come on, Ty.
Guy Fieri?
No, bar rescue. The guy with the Troy Calhoun covered hair.
Oh, I don't know.
You've never seen that show?
I've heard of the show. I don't know the show.
Oh, John Taffer. Okay. There is something bar rescue-y about Dave Clawson, who goes to Bowling Green with a down reputation after his time at Tennessee, but the Clawfence works there. The Clawfence at Wake. 11-win Wake.
Yeah.
11 wins.
Yeah.
Mike Norvell has been a very good coach. But in terms of degree of difficulty, North Carolina in this moment, especially if we're going to give Dave Clawson credit for knowing that state, recruiting that state, I think he probably gets the nod after a disappointing start, but current flourishing of Mike Norvell at Florida State. I'm giving Dave Clawson having that ability to win wherever more easily than Mike Norvell at this moment.
Dave Clawson has 91 wins at the FBS level.
Mm-hmm.
He's been a coach for a while. He's been around for a good long time. As you said, he's got an interesting track record. Who would you rather have at North Carolina right now? You had $5 million. You're going to give the money to Dave Clawson or Mike Norvell, because the reason I bring that up is because Mike Norvell now, after a bit of a rocky start at Florida State, seems to be trending in a good direction. You and I are both pretty high on the Noles coming into 2023.
Definitely.
So if Mike Norvell continues that success, if he continues to build that program up and make them more of a threat, you could argue the answer here would be Norvell.
Head to head, it's been Wake these past couple seasons. So there's that.
Yeah.
I'm going Clawfence. I'm going with Wake and that ability to win at North Carolina. Going with Dave Clawson and that ability to win in Chapel Hill right now. I think with more resources and the ability to this is not Jordan Travis is not Mike Norvell's quarterback.
Right.
Whereas Sam Hartman before was Dave Clawson's quarterback. I think there is something about identifying, and then so if you're North Carolina, you're going to have the ability to swim in a bigger lake, a bigger sea, whatever, in terms of the quarterbacks you can attract to that school, as we've seen now. I think I'm going Clawson here.
I sort of disagree with you. I probably feel better about Clawson than Norvell, but this is the first one that I think.
Do you think Clawson is a cute story? You can be honest.
A cute story?
Yeah, a cute story, but not an impressive story. It's cute that they've won at Wake Forest.
No. I don't
But
think
when
so.
you get to the big boys, I trust Norvell.
I don't know if I trust Norvell to that level. I mean,
well, more than Clawson.
Yeah, I think, no, I don't feel like it's a cute story with Dave Clawson. I think it's been, a cute story is a flash in the pan. A cute story is an underdog story for one season, and then they go back to relative anonymity. But this has not been a one and done type thing for Dave Clawson. Dave Clawson has done a really good job at Wake Forest. It took him a while to build this program up. He's had NFL caliber talent move through there at various positions. It's not like Sam Hartman or bust.
Right.
So this has been a little bit deeper than maybe most would realize. I think I'll give it to Clawson. I do think, though, that this will be a pivotal year. This will be a very interesting year if we come back a year from now and have this conversation, Norvell versus Clawson, if we would feel differently. Because we're going to see what Wake looks like without Sam Hartman. And we're going to see what year 3, I guess it's year 3 of Norvell, or year 4, whatever it is for him, at Florida State, with Jordan Travis, with a program that seems like it's aligned finally and moving in a good direction. This one feels to me like we might change our mind a year from now, but I'll go with Clawson for now.
The only thing is, Wake has struggled to figure out defense. I won't say full on catastrophic, but it's more of 74th, 89th type best defense in the country, where you're going to be prone to losing a little too much in the way of shootouts that I'm not comfortable with. Whereas Florida State has steadily improved on both sides of the ball, it has seemed, and different place, different ability to recruit to Winston-Salem than it is to recruit to Tallahassee. But that's what I would hold against Dave Clawson right now, that he is a coach built for a place like Wake Forest, and that Mike Norvell might have a higher ceiling at a bigger place.
Yeah,
I get that.
And as you said, I mean, the recruiting at Florida State, obviously, it's not really even in the same class as Wake Forest, whether you're talking about recruits coming out of high school or just transfers. I mean, look at what Florida State did on the transfer market the last 2 years. They've been very aggressive. And that's helped. Yeah. It's helped in a big way. This might be the most fascinating first-round matchup that we have to discuss here.
All right, here
Midwest, the number 4 seed against the number 5 seed. Chris Kleiman, who Bruce Feldman has as his 13th overall coach.
Okay.
Squaring off against the one, the only Sonny Dykes. National runner-up last season. Bruce has him at number 20. It is almost unheard of that a first-year coach, or at least first year at a new place coach in Sonny Dykes, goes on the type of run that he goes on. We're not talking about taking over Alabama after Saban or taking over Georgia after Kirby Smart. We're talking about taking over a program left by Gary Patterson kind of for dead. It was for sure treading water. Sonny Dykes takes it over, gets the most out of the same players, as we've joked time and again.
As you love to say.
As I love to say, impressively goes on a run, gets to the playoff, gets to the championship, got destroyed in the championship. But the fact that they got there at all was incredible. It was historic in its own right. So I could
nearly won the Big 12, Ty.
Nearly won the Big 12.
Nearly
won the Big 12. We got 2 Big 12 coaches here between Chris Kleiman and Sonny Dykes. I am sort of infatuated with Chris Kleiman.
Okay.
I love Chris Kleiman. Chris Kleiman came over from North Dakota State, had a lot of success at North Dakota State, followed his old athletic director to Manhattan, Kansas. He is consistent. He seems like, if you want to talk about guys who get the most out of their talent, more with less, that is very much Chris Kleiman's story. That is very much why they brought him to Manhattan, Kansas. He is very good at doing that. I think this is a situation for him where it is a very slow build. They're going to give him time to build it. There's not an immense amount of pressure on him to turn out a national championship caliber, a playoff caliber team. They just want the floor to be raised from where it was previously, and he is ever so slightly doing that. Chris Kleiman's Kansas State Wildcats have been a pain in the ass. A pain in the ass the last couple seasons. You just don't want to play them because they're fundamentally sound. All they need are a few playmakers. They know what they're doing out there, and they're always well organized. They're not beating themselves. When they beat themselves, that's when they lose. But more often than not, they're not doing that. You're always getting a really good game out of them. Sonny Dykes, despite the fact that he had an incredible season this past year for TCU, excuse me, which will go down in the history books. We also have the Cal years for Sonny Dykes.
It's the most a team has ever been blown out in a national championship game. That's in the history books. Yeah.
There's probably a conversation we need to have about the Cal years for Sonny Dykes that you could probably speak to more than I can. I think I put Kleiman through. I think Kleiman's my guy here just because, again, he feels rock solid. He feels steady. You could put him at almost any situation, and I think he would find a way to organize the troops and put a quality product out there. Sonny Dykes feels a little bit more boomer busty to me, and that's fine. He made it to a national championship, but I would, if I'm giving my money to somebody, I think I go Kleiman.
He was good at SMU. They had one really good season, but they were sort of an 8-ish win team at SMU. Was the correct hire for TCU and had an incredible year. Chris Kleiman, on the other hand, I think there's just going to be less talent available to play at Kansas State and has been very, very good. And he looked at a 5'5" gentleman, smaller in every way than the co-host of this very show, Ty Hildenbrandt.
Okay.
And said, yeah, we can figure something out. And then you cut to, let's build the whole offense out of this tiny individual, right? That's crazy. And then you have this magical season for TCU. And what's the roadblock? Well, it's Kansas State. It's Kansas State. And they didn't have as good a season as TCU overall, but they beat them in the Big 12 championship game to win the conference. So I'm giving it to Chris Kleiman right now, just because the highs have been higher for Sonny Dykes, beating Michigan in that playoff game. Incredible. Just stupendous. But Chris Kleiman right now, I've seen more. I believe more, even if he thought Adrian Martinez was also going to be the answer at quarterback when it most certainly was not going to be.
I think both are obviously very good coaches. That's why they're on this list to begin with. But do you recall what one of the biggest selling points was about Sonny Dykes taking over that job at TCU?
Offense.
No, not just offense, but his familiarity. Familiarity with the state of Texas.
Yeah.
It could be that Sonny Dykes is a Texas guy. It could be that those skills aren't as transferable outside the great state of Texas, which he knows and loves and is really, really successful at coaching in. But Kleiman was at North Dakota State. Kleiman's now obviously in Manhattan, Kansas. I get the strong sense that you could put this guy pretty much anywhere. You could put him on Mars and you'd find a way to win.
Sure.
Just knows how to do it. And so for that reason, I'm going Kleiman.
He's also, now, to be clear on Kleiman, if you're going to take anything away from him, what we are recognizing as his recent success is taking over a national championship caliber program and winning national championships, right?
Yeah.
And then taking over for a legend in Bill Snyder, the greatest coach of all time. There's a statue, the stadium is named after him.
Bill Snyder Family Stadium, yeah.
And continuing, right? He didn't necessarily build upon the winning the Big 12 is a big deal, obviously, but that he hasn't had to, and this is his program now. He's not winning with somebody else's players. This is his program that he's succeeding with. But the knock on him would be that, yes, the infrastructure has been in place wherever he's been at these past couple schools. Whereas the challenge that Sonny Dykes had at Cal was something that Chris Kleiman never had. You can't hold it against Chris Kleiman, but that's a different kind of challenge. Where SMU was a different kind of challenge. Now, where TCU was sort of a disastrous place, but I think it's such a major part of coaching is roster construction and maintenance. And we don't have that right now with Sonny Dykes at his current place, and at his last place, it was fine, but nothing crazy. So I'm giving it to Kleiman right now.
What I like about this matchup is we can see it on the field.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can see it on the field. All right. James Franklin against Dave Clawson, Dan. This is a fascinating matchup.
At North Carolina.
Yeah.
I'm still going to say roster construction and maintenance. I'm going to say James Franklin.
Man. What's hard for me to override as a Penn Stater is this feeling that James Franklin should be doing better. And I don't know if that's even reality. You know, I mean, he's on the same side or been on the same side of the conference as Ohio State and Michigan. And so it's always going to be tough to get one up on those two schools, especially given where they're at. He has left a lot out there on occasion. I think by and large it's been a very successful campaign for Franklin. I'm not one of the Franklin haters. The Clawson thing, to me, winning at Wake Forest in the way that he has been damn impressive. I think I still probably take Franklin. Franklin's ability to recruit at a really high level and his ability to hire at a really high level, those skills are transferable no matter where you are, right? You could take him, again, you want to talk about putting a guy on Mars, you could put Franklin on Mars and he'd recruit guys to Mars.
Mm-hmm.
He would find a way to do it. So I put Franklin through as well.
I think the defenses are the difference maker to me as well. I think it's talent level and defenses. Yeah. And in a conference that is now, I apologize if I'm forgetting anybody, but there have been 3 playoff teams that have come out of the Big Ten. Mm-hmm. Michigan State, Ohio State.
Yep.
And 1 out of the ACC. Is my math correct? That only Clemson has made the playoff from the ACC?
Yep.
I believe that to be the case. So a more difficult path at Penn State. I think that's kind of a no-brainer. Just in terms of the roster construction of what he would bring there to North Carolina. I would go James Franklin. And I honestly wouldn't think about it for very long.
Chris Kleiman versus Jim Harbaugh.
Okay. So Jim Harbaugh has had more success. Jim Harbaugh has taken a team to a Super Bowl. Jim Harbaugh has been at a place that has traditionally been pretty down with football in Stanford and won there.
Jim Harbaugh has not won an FCS national championship, FYI.
He's not won an FCS national championship, although has FCS coaching experience, right? San Diego's an FCS team.
Yep.
The case for Kleiman is more theoretical, that you are in for a more stable experience, I think, with Chris Kleiman, that the lows will be, I think there's a higher floor, so the lows will be higher to me. That there is not going to be this constant threat of a program in flux like there is at Michigan at times, replacing coordinators, threat of the NFL. Like that's not going to exist. But again, if your coach isn't a threat to leave to the NFL, then maybe your coach isn't as good. So I'm going to go Jim Harbaugh here over Chris Kleiman.
I think Harbaugh's the answer.
Yeah.
And even though I think we want to view this through a strict lens of coaching ability,
mm-hmm.
we also need to consider star power, name recognition. Jim Harbaugh's got name recognition. He's got a reputation that precedes him. Chris Kleiman's been a very successful coach, but I feel like Jim Harbaugh is always going to have an easier time recruiting. In the same way that Nick Saban, you put Nick Saban in the living room of a defensive back,
mm-hmm.
kid would be crazy not to go to Alabama.
Brainer. Yeah.
Nick Saban's got that track record. And I think you got to go Harbaugh here. I love Chris Kleiman. I would love to find a way to put him through, but that brings us then to.
By the way, if you gave Jim Harbaugh the North Carolina roster and you gave him 2 years, I think you'd have him in the playoff.
I could see that.
I mean, given who they have at quarterback right now.
Yeah.
If you gave him Drake May and the ability to overhaul that defensive roster and hire his own coaching staff at North Carolina, 2 years, maybe 3, they're in the playoff. But I guess Drake May won't be there in 3 years, but still.
Would you rather have Drake May or JJ McCarthy?
Drake May.
I'd take Drake May, right? That gotta be Drake May. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Final in the Midwest then. Game we've seen before. It's Jim Harbaugh, it's James Franklin. I think the answer's got to be Jim Harbaugh, right?
I think so. We've seen lower lows at Michigan.
We have.
Which is important. We've seen some questionable hires at Michigan. We've seen some questionable hires at Penn State. I think I'm still taking Michigan.
Yeah.
Right
you got to
now,
prove, if you get to this game,
mm-hmm.
if you were talking about the Midwestern bracket final, the Elite Eight, and you want to put a coach through, you got to prove that you've done something.
Mm-hmm.
Saban's easy. Saban's done everything. But there's only one of the two coaches here that, at least given recent success, is the answer, and that's Jim Harbaugh. He's won the Big Ten consecutive years.
Do you think the best James Franklin Penn State team would beat the best Michigan Harbaugh team? So you're going back Trace McSorley, Saquon, a bunch of good receivers, Mike Gesicki. I don't know when everybody overlapped. Some really, really good. We're talking about Igor. What was his name? Gross Matos. Talk to me about
Igor Gross Matos.
Yeah, YGM. I don't know if he's the best defensive lineman James Franklin has had, but they had some dudes who got after offenses, got after quarterbacks. They've had some incredible pass rushers, and Micah Parsons. Like the level of talent has been incredible at Penn State on defense. Not to say it's also been incredible at Michigan, of course. But the best Penn State team, whenever that was, against the best Michigan team, I'm still taking Michigan, I think.
I think Michigan because of the defense. Let's put it this way. For Penn State to beat Ohio State, which happens once in a blue moon, that's a big deal. That's a national championship in and of itself. That is also true at Michigan. Michigan's just done it 2 consecutive years. And they've made the playoff 2 consecutive years. They've won the conference 2 consecutive years. You could argue that Jim Harbaugh is getting better. Jim Harbaugh is starting to figure this thing out. We've talked a lot about in recent months here about Josh Gaddis and his time at Michigan, and now recently his short-lived stay at Miami. By the way, he got hired by Maryland since the time we last recorded. But I think there was always this idea with bringing a guy like Gaddis aboard that he was going to revolutionize the offense. He was going to change things around. He was going to make it better. It's going to be more wide open. And, he was there for a bit, and he kind of did it to a degree, but ultimately it's turned into kind of a hybrid of what Harbaugh was doing before with some new concepts, right? It's not all of that. It's different enough, but it's not so drastically different that it feels like night and day. I think Harbaugh's ability to kind of stick to his roots in a sense, but also be creative and move the needle forward, sure. Add steam to the balloon, what have you. His ability to build kind of on previous success and stay true to his roots is in and of itself kind of impressive. I put Jim Harbaugh through.
Yeah, Jim Harbaugh in Michigan's 2022 season, I think it was 2017. Yep. That would have been the Saquon Rose Bowl year for Penn State. So both the 2016 Michigan team and the 2022 Michigan team finished better in terms of net points per drive in the same conference, right? Yep. So offensive points per drive minus defensive points per drive. So if we're saying 2 Michigan teams were better than the best of Penn State in the last 6-7 years, I think I'm going Harbaugh, Michigan here.
Yeah, I mean the other I think easier argument to make is if we're going to talk about recruiting, right? You're correct in saying that the talent on hand at Penn State has been phenomenal. The talent on hand, per this chart that we got from our friends over at College Football Reddit, has Penn State 11th on this list.
Right.
Michigan is below Penn State and arguably has done more in the last 5 years. Yeah. Definitely has done more in the last 5 years. So I think Harbaugh's the answer.
Yep. With you.
Why don't we do this? Let's round out our final coach between the South and the Midwest bracket. We can come back and finish this thing out on Thursday when the NCAA tournament actually does kick off. That brings us to Nick Saban against Jim Harbaugh, Dan. Good matchup, high profile matchup here between the greatest college football coach of all time
and Nick Saban. Yeah.
And Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah.
So we have to put Saban through. Saban has to be the guy who goes through here. But if you are constructing an argument for Jim Harbaugh, what does that look like?
He's taken an NFL team to a Super Bowl. So there's that. He was able to succeed at a traditionally average to below average place like Stanford, where Nick Saban has never proven it, depending on how you feel about the Miami Dolphins.
Okay.
And even then, they were 500 team, right? There's not much you can do in terms of a case, unless you want to look at the North Carolina job and say that Jim Harbaugh would do a better job, that he's much more of a chopped chef than an iron chef, that he could do better with lesser ingredients than Nick Saban could, that he's gotten a little bit snobby this time at Alabama and LSU. Yeah.
It's just so hard to kind of go through those mental gymnastics, because anywhere Saban goes, people are going to want to follow. He's the greatest coach of all time. So it's like, you can't even make that argument against him. Anywhere he goes, he can take over any program, and he would have an instant gravitas and ability to attract talent.
But better NFL coach, Jim Harbaugh.
Much better NFL coach, yeah.
Which is not an NFL podcast. So whatever that means.
No.
But overall, Jim Harbaugh is going to attract talent. Nick Saban has done the most with the most. Jim Harbaugh has done a ton with less. Do I think if you gave Nick Saban top 12, top 8 recruiting classes like Michigan and Harbaugh have had, that he would win national championships? Probably, yeah. So I'm going to say Nick Saban in this one, yeah.
As Bruce says, this one is easy. He put Saban 1 overall. No. He's won a remarkable 7 national titles. His teams have finished in the top 8, 14 of the past 15 years, which is hard to do. Man, it is hard to do. We're used to hearing the same teams at the top, and of course, Alabama is one of them. But if you look outside of that lead pack of Alabama and Georgia, Ohio State, we can put Clemson in there.
Yeah.
If you look outside that lead pack, it is hard to be consistent in college football. It is hard to be consistent. You have a lot of the same teams that are kind of hovering in the top 20, but to produce at that high level year in and year out, it's just, there's a reason he's the greatest of all time. It's unheard of to do what he's done.
Yeah, Jim Harbaugh's probably number 3 in this moment, somewhere like that.
He's up there.
In this moment, because of Clemson's recent struggles. But it's a conversation. Maybe he's 4. But yeah, it's, that'll be a question for another day. If you're North Carolina, you want to pay Dabo, you want to play Harbaugh. I think it's a relatively easy answer, but still at the same time, I took a second to think about, just because of what Harbaugh has accomplished overall, and that body of work is pretty incredible, but just not as incredible as the best guy of all time.
We've got 16 coaches left that we will talk through on the Thursday episode. The winner of those 16 is going to square off against Nick Saban. There are certain coaches that we have not discussed at all. I think you know where this conversation is going, but some big names in the East and Southeast brackets: Dabo Swinney, Ryan Day,
Scott Loeffler,
of course, Kirby Smart, Lincoln Riley, some big time names here that, Kirby is obviously the easy name to throw out given recent success, but I don't know. Kirby against Ryan Day could be an interesting matchup.
Can I ask you 2 names? Is Brent Venables in this side?
Brent Venables is not on the list at all.
Is Marcus Freeman?
No.
Dan Lanning?
No.
Interesting.
Yeah, this is based on Bruce's.
I totally understand.
And
there's no body of work for any of those guys.
That's the problem. Yeah, with the body of work, maybe we can do a separate bracket with the limited experience bracket. But
PJ and the Flecktones, are they on there?
PJ Fleck is a first-round matchup with Ryan Day.
Ooh. Ryan Day has done nothing at Western Michigan.
Yeah, more interesting. Dan, this is fun. We will continue the conversation on our next episode. We encourage everybody to stop on back. Fill out your brackets. Email us solidverbal@gmail.com. Let us know what we got right, what we got wrong. Don't forget to follow along on social media and check out the YouTube channel at solidverbal.com/YouTube. We'll get you over there, or you can just go to youtube.com/@solidverbal and it'll get you there as well. Both places will work. Hit subscribe. Make sure you head on over to quickslants.solidverbal.com. That is the weekly newsletter that we send out to keep you up to date with all things college football, Dan, every Thursday.
Agree.
For that guy over there, my good friend, Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hildenbrandt, thanks so much for downloading, for listening, for playing along our bracket game at home. We'll talk to you all on Thursday. Stay solid.
Peace.